What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about Disco Elysium. I think, as far as my memory goes, my very first CRPG experience. So, hey, any suggestions of other games you want me to cover in this genre, I'm fully open to it now. I feel like I got my feet wet. It took a little bit, and that's going to be part of what I want to talk about in this video. It took me a while to get into the groove and understanding how a game like this actually operates, but once I figured it out, it was really smooth sailing, I guess, from that point on. A lot of complexities. This game is a very complex game. But man, I mean, to start it off, what a game. This is a really, really great game. And, you know, I heard about it when it first released. It was never up my alley. I think it eventually makes its way to PS Plus. I don't know if it's on Game Pass, but hey, when you make your way onto one subscription service I got to try it out, right? So I think the game's turning 5 years old. I know it's got the final cut, and the final cut is the version that I played. What a game. Truly, again, it took me a little while to get into it, but once I really started to figure it out, like, you got to take your time. I think the game, at least from what I was reading, and I watched a couple of even like explanation videos on the game in case I missed something, which I actually did. I missed a couple quests in this game, but one thing that many people talked about is how this game really overloads you right away. Like, within the first day in game, the game just throws a lot of things at you, and it's kind of meant to be like that, and then things kind of settle down and get more into a groove. So I'm very happy I played it. Honestly, like, this was again, this is one of the most different types of games. I don't play CRPGs, so this was a very different type of CRPG. Again, if you have any for me, I know like Wasteland 3 is a game people have talked about that I should now play because I played Disco. Let me know other CRPGs because I'm definitely in the mood. And I think my body and my soul are now ready to handle these type of games. Okay, so let's go over the experience, what it's like as somebody who doesn't really play them, right? Jumping into it, okay? So, you know, you're immediately thrown in, you have this conversation going on. Now, I've seen like the layout, you know, leading into this game. I've seen what it looks like. I've seen that there's choices. I knew that there were roles, you know, going on, that you have, you know, multiple chances, sometimes, not all the time, right, to handle situations. But they throw you in, and I gotta be honest, there's little to no direction, and I think that's just like par for the course. And it took me a while. I would say it took me around 2 to 3 hours, probably the first day that I played it. This was stretched, you know, out maybe like 7, 8, 9 days that I played this game. Just and again, every day I think got a little bit better. But you're immediately thrown into this world, and it's like, what do I do? And I want to just kind of stress again, from somebody who's not like really into these, how fluid and how almost like they lead you almost accidentally from one thing to the next. Now, look, a lot of games will like funnel you through things. A lot of games, a main point of, say, like a level design or whatever, right, is to get you organically and naturally from one point to the next. A game like this, though, where it's so, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of small. Like, the square foot, you know, kind of area of the world is not very big, especially because, you know, more of like the village type, you unlock that later. You have to, you know, you have to wait for the bridge to kind of connect, and then you don't have to do everything there. Now, I actually did. By the time I got towards the ending, where I had to have, you know, the skill check to, let's say, get to a certain ladder, right, I actually was at 97% likely, because I did a lot of quests. I did probably 70-75% of the things that this game allowed you to do. I did them. So I was really happy with the progress that I made. Again, as the days went, as the my real world days went, I really got more comfortable, and it was like, okay, I understand how this works. I understand that, like, hey, you might fail the first time, but let's kind of beef up whatever, if it's visual calculus or if it's, you know, authority or whatever it might be. Let's figure it out. Let's kind of game the system. Let's, maybe sometimes I'm going to say things that the person wants to hear. Maybe that'll help it out. Or, you know, doing certain tasks, exploring the world and just going through things. These are going to help me later on. But the game has a way of naturally getting you from one place to the next. Now, again, upon like looking at other people, how it was handled, there were a couple things I did that I feel like were out of order, like looking back. But in the moment, especially I would say the first 60%, I really felt I did exactly what I was supposed to do, maybe even before I was supposed to do it, or before the game would give me clues about it. Going through and learning about the architecture, right, and like the district, or the collection of stores that failed, and like why did they fail, and finding the fridge, and really and learning about it. Why exactly is it literally like a supernatural thing, or was it just kind of all luck that all of these people just kind of had terrible ideas or didn't put everything together? Figuring that out, that's necessary to do. I didn't really know it was necessary, but you go through it and it helps you continue the rest of the game. So a lot of those moments, that's really what I want to stress very early on in this video, is the game has just a natural and organic way of pushing you to the next thing, even though, and I think this is actually what makes the game so special, even though I was so foreign to these type of games, I felt once you figure it out, and when I say figure it out, I just mean like, okay, well, how do these checks work? And like, how do you even level up in this game, right? Like, where do I put the things in? What kind of build do you make your character even just in the very, very beginning of the game, right? Like, who are these characters? Who are you supposed to talk to kind of get the ball rolling? It's a lot of exploration, right? You go up to Kuno, you figure stuff out, you kind of branch out, then you kind of come back to, right? And it's like, that's how this game is. And that takes, I would say, a pretty sizable learning curve. But once you get it, it's like, well, I'm going to go here, talk to this person. This person might give me just a little bit. Maybe there's a skill check here that I can't do yet. Okay, now I'm going to go over here. And how this game lays everything out to you, again, once you get used to it, you get the map. You get the map, I would say, towards the end of the game. But, you have all of your skills. You have your gear. And, that took a little bit of learning, too. But, I never really became too clingy to one outfit. Obviously, like, the main look of Harry, the main character, right, is like the full-on, facial hair. I actually, at some point in the game, I shaved, and, Kim made the comment of like, oh, you looked better, with it not shaved then. And I just felt, okay, it's a skill check, I'm going to attempt it, and I succeeded on the first go. But the game does have a good way of, filtering information, making sure which skill checks are replayable, which ones you can go back to, when did you get missions, generally, I guess, how to complete them, although a lot of it is kind of up to your intellect to kind of figure it out. And I played it one specific way, and that's another thing with, RPGs, CRPGs, more particular, right? In a CRPG, you can handle these things in so many different ways. So I went into the game thinking I'm going to kind of smooth talk my way through it. I'm going to use visual calculus, I mentioned, because that was a big one for me. I put so many points, or I think I maybe already had in the beginning of the game. Visual calculus was like my best friend. I tried to use more dialogue choices versus hand-to-hand stuff, physical stuff, intimidation stuff. That stuff was almost non-existent. And the cool thing is with any of these type of games, but this game in particular, that gets you into all sorts of situations. Some things are very easy. Some things that I was thinking, man, if I didn't do visual calculus, or if I didn't do empathy, or if I didn't do whatever, I would be in a load of trouble right now. But then thinking about it, it's like, well, you know what? There were other instances where if I had better hand-eye, or had better this or that, I could have cut, some of the length off of this game immediately, because I had to find almost more like clever talking ways around those situations where I could have just like brute force my way through it. So the game is just so good at allowing you to kind of figure it out for yourself, but like rolling out the red carpet, letting you go, and eventually it all kind of clicks and all kind of makes sense. You also have some just incredible characters, and really the main two, although as the game begins to expand, you get some good ones, even characters that are in it for very, very little amount of time. I'm thinking a certain character that something very pivotal happens to them at the very end of the game, or towards the end of the game. But you have Harry and Kim, right? This tag team duo, what a freaking match made in heaven. So Harry is a character, right? Super interesting, because again, it really depends on what kind of character that you want him to be, or you kind of put in. But he does have some similar traits, around everything, no matter what you do. His story is pretty tragic. His story, begins, I would say, pretty confusing, but then you figure it out, right? Like, you start to figure out why he's in the situation, what he does, and again, a lot of that stuff is very organic, like finding his badge, learning about just his past life because of the memory issues that he has, right? And, the game also, I don't want to spoil the ending, but the game has a couple ways of being anticlimactic in a way that's actually insanely cool. And for those that know, you'll know, right? The ending of the game, like solving a certain thing, is, in my opinion, pretty anticlimactic, but they actually do it perfectly. Like, I'm not mad in the slightest. So I don't even know if those two like phrases go together, but I'm not mad in the slightest how that went. I think it makes sense. I think it kind of actually fits like the themes of this game. It works so well, but it doesn't feel like this, the build-up happens before the ending. The build-up happens maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours before the ending, and then it kind of cools off. And then another one is Harry himself, some of his background stuff, and specifically, again, without spoiling it, how his story ends. I would say pretty anticlimactic, but it kind of makes sense. And to be honest with you, it played a little bit more into how I played Harry. So Harry can be played a variety, of different ways. Now, the one thing that I did that was kind of extreme is I took the communist angle. So, he'd be running around, specifically the communist quest, right? Where he's trying to recruit people in the communism. He's trying to figure it out. He's trying to see like which kind of branch of it he fits in, and just kind of running up to people and saying, hey, I feel like I'm a communist now. That's probably the most extreme that I made Harry. But beyond that, I try to keep him as like steady as the game allowed you to be, right? Because he can get pretty depressed at times. He can get pretty wacky at times. This guy is a loose cannon, and I think that really is cool because there is a little bit of like a cliche almost in him, right? Where he's this cop that, forgets everything. And he's just like, at times, he's just like this bumbling moron, right? Like, he can't do a lot of simple tasks. He says some very, very dumb stuff at times. But he also, and they say it in the game, he has a way of getting people to talk. No, like, however he does it, it doesn't really matter, and it changes depending on how you play. But his main talent is just getting people to talk, and he somehow gets information from anybody he goes to. He's got a fantastic background. That part, I would say, is a little bit more cliche, right? Where, like, this is the guy that has lost his way. You don't really know why he's lost his way. He's got memory issues, so you don't even know, the situation he's kind of in. But once you learn about his background, he solves things. Like, that is his main trait. He gets to the bottom of things, and he's got a spectacular record compared to Kim, compared to any of like the precincts out there, right? Like, that is his main thing. So that's a little bit more cliche, and like you've seen that before. But again, how they do it and how they allow you to be Harry, right? Like, you can handle things however you want. You can be more extreme, and it's almost maybe even more funny or more ironic the more extremes that you go with him, that he can act in certain ways, and then also at the same time he actually eventually, not right away, he eventually gets the job done. And it's through, again, he figures out how many maybe killers that there were at one point, but then something doesn't add up, and then you have to be able to stand up for yourself. You have to have that authority, right, to be able to talk further, and he just figures things out as the game goes. And then he's very much balanced out by Kim, who is a character that, well, you see him behind me here, you see him, on the cover. He's a pretty darn important character as well. I think the balancing out thing is his main quality. I think that's kind of why he's there. But I mean, it's as simple as that, but it's also more complex, right? Because these two make a really interesting pair. And there's even gameplay dynamics when these two are together versus apart. I actually made the mistake of, eventually you find the body, right? And you can do a lot of things with that body, but one thing you can eventually do, right, is basically take it away, right? So Kim takes it away, and he's gone, I believe, for like a full day. I think I did that too soon. Pretty sure I would have handled that differently if I had a rerun, with that choice. But Kim took it, and I actually explored a lot of the village, including the car crash. I explored all that by myself. Now, upon watching it, very much doesn't seem like you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to do it with Kim. But again, the mechanics there I think are really cool because you'll act a little bit differently if Kim is not there. You also, I mean, in some ways it's a good and bad thing, right? When Kim's there, you're trying to like match it. You're trying to balance it. You don't want to alienate, or at least I didn't want to alienate him too much. And he's also very helpful, right? Like, he'll throw things in. He'll help you when you're stuck. Not as like a cliche game feature, as like it seems very, very natural. He can be very integral to getting some people to talk when they otherwise wouldn't, right? Like, you need him in certain instances. So it was interesting, even as a gameplay mechanic, to actually do a large part of the game that I really don't think I was supposed to do, and I did it without him. And then there's just the dynamic of those two together. I think they just work really, really well. I was always excited to kind of see Kim chime in, and it made things almost sometimes more awkward, right? Like you're going around talking about communism, and like Kim, who is not really into it at all, right? He's there for a specific role, and you can kind of have him open up, and I think they get a little bit more buddy, but at least they did, with me. You have that element to their friendship, I guess you can eventually get there, but it's just funny, and I think it becomes more funny again the more extremes that you take Harry, where you can do some crazy stuff, and Kim's just like standing there where he's like, well, I don't necessarily approve, but I guess I'm here, right? And like that's the relationship that those two have. Now I do want to talk about skill checks just for a couple minutes here, because obviously a very big part of the game, and something that, because I played Baldur's Gate 3, which is really maybe one of the only other games, and I didn't play it that long actually, but I know how those things work. I can understand skill checks. I played the XCOM games, so I understand the percentages. So 98% of the time, I think the skill checks were fine. And again, the gameplay loop there with a very sophisticated game, I think was genius, right? Because you really have to start to figure things out on your own. You start to realize that a lot of the things you do in this game, and some things could be small, but a lot of the things that you do, depending on choices you make talking with people, or if you found certain things for people or whatever it is, some of those things can enhance skill checks, right? So you have that, then you also have like your talents that again you build out in the beginning, and then you have the skill points that you acquire by going through the game and completing objectives, and then you put those into the skills, right? So most of the time was fine, and there's a good loop again there where it's like, okay, well, I have a 42% shot, but if I just leveled up one more time, maybe it jumps to like in the 70s, and I feel more comfortable with that. Obviously, if it's a red skill check, you got to be very, very careful, but if it's white, okay, you can have multiple tries, but you do have to change something before you go back and do it. There were 2 times, I told a friend of mine this, there were 2 times where I pulled the XCOM thing, which when I say that, I mean, I'm sure everybody's experienced this. In any game that has luck or skill check kind of mechanics, right? You have like an 89% chance. In XCOM, you'd have like a 92% chance to make a shot, and you miss, and then the enemy kills you, and you lose that, ally for good. It is the most crushing and at times very unfair feeling you'll ever feel in your life. That happened 2 times the entire game. I felt it was very fair. 2 times in this game, I had an 82% chance and I had an 88% chance back to back, and I failed both. And that made me want to quit at that moment. That was several hours in. I got to be real. In the beginning, when I was learning, that never really happened, right? So it didn't deter me. But if that would have happened towards the beginning of the game, if I would have had like an 80-90% chance to do something and it didn't work, back when I was struggling to figure out if I was even into this type of game, that might have been it. But luckily for me, and luckily for the game's sake of me playing it, it was separated, where that happened probably 7, 8, 9 hours in, and I got frustrated. I was like, oh, for the love of freaking God, 88% chance? You got 12% chance. I tried multiple things at times that had 22% chance, that had 13% chance. Oh, it never worked. But when you have a 12% chance of failing something, oh, that's the time that it fails. So I'd like to just criticize that part real fast. But no, beyond those 2 times, there were those 2 times, and they were back-to-back for some God unknown reason. But I always felt it was fair. I always felt the mechanic of, again, a lot of your own actions. You got to figure stuff out, and it's not always going to be so apparent what to do. It just goes back into this big circle, right, where so much of this game is a learning curve, and so much of this game is you kind of figuring it out as it goes and the world kind of opening up. But at the same time, it does a weirdly good job of almost organically funneling you through these things when you wouldn't think that that would be the way that it goes, right? And then, again, to touch upon the politics and to touch upon the world itself, I find the world to be really, really interesting. As I was playing, you realize just how important all of these factors are, and you can handle things different ways. I made some choices that I don't know in real life if I'd be very proud of them, but I felt Harry is a loose enough cannon. I was thinking maybe I could take some stuff back later down the line. There's ways of double crossing people in this game. I'm thinking specifically that letter that you have to have people sign. I did it, I believe, to the homeless people that didn't even actually write words on it, so it's not going to do anything, right? That reclamation project to basically revamp that village, I guess in my playthrough doesn't actually go through. You can kick all those people, I imagine, after the game ends, right? They'll all be kicked out and it'll be like a multi-year demolition derby there. But no, for me, it was just scribbles. It wasn't actually, signatures. So when that letter makes it, it shouldn't go through, right? Which is a way of double crossing. So even just ways that the game introduces those elements to you, love it. I really loved it. And the world was complex. And I kept kind of going back and forth where it's like, I cared to an extent about the political stuff. I think at times it got very, very confusing for me, especially more of like the village stuff. And then those people in the tents and they're trying to build like the nightclub kind of like that whole arc got to a point where it was a lot of reading for my very small brain to kind of comprehend. But I do think in terms of the actual strike itself and kind of the double plays going on, I think I generally got it. But I kind of went back and forth, and I think the game did a pretty good job of being like, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on here, and there's like how the world works and how the RCM works. And I think the RCM lore was probably kind of my favorite of like what they do. They're not looked upon, at least there, right, very, very strongly, but they also don't do all that much. They're there just enough. They're actually anywhere just enough to keep the peace. They don't, ultimately, even with arrests and stuff, like how they do arrests and how they take out people, let's say, is not like orthodox. It's very out there. So, a lot of that stuff I really, really enjoyed. But what I think I appreciate is that it can also just be a very intimate story of Harry. Kind of keeping it more centralized or kind of keeping it more dumbing it down, I guess, basically, right? And then also you have the murder case. Like the murder case is, and that's how the game starts. The murder case is like the front line goal, right? Like that's what you're going for. And it can kind of stay there. And you do, because you start to see, okay, well, these guys that the community looks at as like a police force, well, why do they have to be like that? Why does the town look at them like that? Why is everybody struggling? Like what happened here even in the first place? Like, again, you have the union and you have the strikes and stuff, but like what else was going on? Kuno, like he comes across a certain way, but then you realize, well, he doesn't really have much of a choice considering his situation in life, right? Like you start to open things up, and they can get about as complicated or complex as you want them to. But you can also still kind of just focus on the murder case and figuring out, okay, a guy died, things are not lining up, like at the end of the day, it's who killed him. You think in fact, the game tells you right away who killed him, and it's a lie, right? Like, kind of, I guess, right? But it's like you have to figure it out, and it gets complex. And again, I think at the end, it's actually kind of anticlimactic purposely, which I really, really like. But you can just focus on that, and there's many twists and turns, because again, you're figuring things out, things are not lining up, you have witnesses, you have different people you can talk to, you have different things you can do with those people. And then there are a couple really, I mentioned the ending of the game maybe isn't like this massive revelation, but towards the end, there's one sequence I'm thinking about that is pretty big. Many characters can potentially, get eliminated, and a whole lot of other stuff can happen there, and that's the scene I'm talking about for those that know. Well, I won't spoil it because I wasn't ready for that. I walked myself into that by accident. I was actually going to go buy health and morale. I wasn't planning on handling that situation right away. You have to handle it right away, so just be prepared. And multiple skill checks failed there on purpose, I feel, because those were just not the things. When I was in that situation, my Harry was not meant for that situation. And my jaw, I don't think has ever hit the floor, definitely not in this game, did not hit the floor more than that sequence of events. It was maybe like a 5 to 10 minute sequence where it's like you are in a load of blank, and the skills that are required here are not the skills that I was ready for, and you can't, there's no retries. The loading thing, I wasn't ready to like save scrub kind of thing. I wasn't ready. So that was a huge moment, and that was a very like bigger than the game type moment. Like the rest of the game doesn't reflect that. I feel like they almost added that just to, whether it was to like add stakes or to really like start to spice things up, because the rest of the game really doesn't kind of match that energy, which is fine because it felt so different and it felt very refreshing. But then it's like, okay, well, everything is going to blank here. Like I was really not prepared, and then there's kind of the fallout of it, where you get back in the groove, back in the feel of the actual game, and it's like, okay, it's good to be back here because that was kind of crazy. So no, overall, I really liked it. It took me a couple hours. It took me like a full day, first day of me playing it. But in game, within the first day, I accomplished a lot. I think I accomplished more than what I've seen online of what you're supposed to kind of accomplish in that first day. Oh my God. I explored. I kind of went off the beaten path. I didn't even investigate the body. I think Kim told me at the end of day one, we didn't even investigate the body. We really should do that tomorrow. It's like, okay, yeah, I forgot. I mean, I didn't really forget. I was having too much fun just exploring and figuring out literally how this game works. But I had an absolute blast, and I really feel, maybe some of the political things went over me, or maybe I can't retain it all, but I think I get this type of game now. And I mean, truly, and I don't think I'm a pro at it or anything, but I feel I'm way more comfortable with a game like Disco Elysium now than I was, 2-3 weeks ago before I played it. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.